Let me preface this experience report by saying, I know there are people that eat this kind of dose and don't struggle with it. This is one of my first experiences with oral weed, and I know my weed tolerance is pathetic, but that is what makes it so different. The box story: weed had just become legal in my state, and I was one of the very few people that never tried pot going through school. My mother is schizophrenic, and I was always far too scared to take the plunge. I had done edibles maybe half a dozen times before I ate the 600 mg brownie in this experience report, and overdid it once and had one regrettable experience with a 75 mg edible, but it doesn't even compare. I can't provide any times on where the experience started and ends because it all happened in my sleep, and I will admit I was stupid by putting that brownie in the same place I keep actual food with my history of sleepwalking and eating. I knew my limits with weed, and I had just gotten that brownie the day before. I saw the dosage and I was astounded by how much THC was in it, and believe me when I say, I absolutely had no intention of eating the entire thing. At some point early in the morning, I walked to the cupboard, grabbed the brownie and ate it and went back to bed, and the next memory I have is waking up in a full anxiety attack. I couldn't breathe, the walls were breathing and melting. I couldn't form sentences or even walk, I was so astronomically high. It felt like I weighed 2,000 pounds, and I was absolutely convinced I was going to die from this goddamn brownie. I knew I had to leave some sort of message for my mom, explaining how I had died, so I tossed myself out of bed, onto the ground, and proceeded to crawl to my computer. I couldn't manage to get myself into my computer chair, and I tried for Lord knows how long to remember my password and also try to have enough coordination to type it in, from the floor. I was so high that I was completely non-functional in every single measurable regard. After failing to get onto my computer, I gave into the sedation forces of the brownie and just laid in the middle of the living room completely naked for an unknown amount of time until I awoke to having to use the bathroom. I crawled from the living room to the bathroom, and at this point, I still couldn't walk or function at all, so I sat on my knees and pissed in the bathtub. After that, I crawled back to the living room where I was unable to stay awake any longer. At roughly 3 a.m. the next day, I woke up and I could walk again, but I was still high as hell, but it was manageable. The brownie gave me the worst weed hangover in the world, which lasted a grand total of around 4 months of DP, drive, confused thinking, and bipolar depression. I absolutely never want to get that high ever again. I consider myself to be a well-experienced smoker of cannabis and generally have used good caution while doing so. I have always loved smoking weed and generally had good experiences. I always smoked it with trusted friends and loved how it would let me unwind. I've never had any ill effects other than mild anxiety and one panic attack. After my first panic attack, I learned that I wasn't the first to experience this and decided it must be a one-off. I learned a lot about anxiety and felt I could shake off any future occurrences of a panic attack. I felt confused and baffled as to why I reacted this way. I decided then to do a test and smoke a few hits with my friend Jay for my 2 days off from work. I was deeply relaxed for the first 2 days and felt very relaxed and carefree about life. I thought one more day would be perfect, so I called out sick the next day. I went to my buddy Jay's house again to have a nice relaxing day watching movies and smoking a bit. Ready to take on the sweet herb, I had no worries and freed my mind anxiety. This was one of the first times smoking from a bong, and I thought I'd go for a few really good hits. Damn it. It was back. I felt oncoming panic and anxiety yet again. After we hung out for a bit and I took some deep breaths, I could still feel my heart beating way too fast. I thought those 2 good hits were far too little to feel these feelings again. I politely excused myself from Jay's house and I took some deep breaths in the car and turned on the doors, waiting for the Sunday. I was high as a kite and felt the familiar racing heart, mild anxiety, but was able to shake it off somewhat. The music helped me get into a stoner state of mind and let my worries drift away. At this time I thought it would be a good time to visit my old friend B. I started my journey breathing deep and taking the side streets. When I arrived I told B that I was really high and enjoying it as I was able to harness my anxiety, panic. At this point B gave me a nice little package of pot cookies that I'd later consume that night. At this point I'd never eaten pot and thought I'd give it a try. I wanted to beat my panic attack and thought I'd go for a super session to train myself. I quickly ate 2 small cookies that night at about 8 p.m. to quickly feel the most euphoric I've ever felt on any substance. It only took about 30-60 minutes to kick in. After eating the cookies I couldn't get to sleep and was starting to have racing thoughts, concepts and ideas racing through my head. Being a computer geek I decided to browse the web and listen to some of my favorite 60s psych, garage bands. As the night progressed I found I was reading whole articles very quickly. I was finding a lot of intrigue with H.P. Lovecraft's early life. I didn't know why it came to me. He just always intrigued me and thought I'd read up on him. This is where I came across his writing about the mirage plant, and how it has been considered to be the true origin of the meaning of 420. In my stone state this blew my mind and I had to take a break. His words spoke right to me and I was thinking deeply at this point. I got a little tired around 1 a.m. and thought I'd lay on the couch for a bit. This is where things were getting weird for me. The dream I experienced shortly after haunts me to this day. I remember being in front of a group of men in full Freemasonic dress and they were initiating me to be a 33rd degree Freemason. It was dark and the men kept telling me I was chosen to follow out their task. At this point I awoke sweating with a fast beating heart. I got up and went outside to smoke a cigarette. I looked at the clock and it was just after 3 o'clock a.m. The cigarette calmed me down a bit and I could think about my dream. Normally it would have just been a dream, but being high I managed to run my mind into an over-analytical loop of what the dream was really trying to say. I've always been a little intrigued by secret societies. The night sky was so clear and the stars were bright. I got a strange dark feeling shortly after and felt I knew the answer to the universe. I felt like there was a reason I chose to smoke and eat weed. For what seemed like an eternity of being stoned I decided to go to bed shortly after 4:20 a.m. and decided I found what being high was all about. I listened to some electric wizard and the slow drone lulled me off to sleep. The next day I awoke refreshed but didn't feel myself. I still felt high but I was thinking clear enough to go to work, or so I thought. What was I thinking? I was still high and was overanalyzing everything. I went to work and totally freaked my coworkers out. I kept telling them that the computer system wasn't running right. In my strange state of mind was trying to explain how to fix it. I had to use the restroom multiple times due to all the water I was drinking to flush the THC out of my system. How could I still be high and why was I starting to feel panicky yet again? I've been in touch with my spirituality but never liked to label myself as any certain religion. On my first break I thought I'd meditate, pray that these feelings would pass. Strangely it kind of worked. But what happened next was any pot smoker's worst nightmare. I was asked into my supervisor's office. That did it. The panic really set in then. They could tell I was high on something and I wasn't in my right mind. My sup said I had to take a drug test and drove me to the clinic to run a test. At this time I really disliked my job and decided to stand up for myself. I refused to take the drug test and they sent me home. My wife came to pick me up and she and I were really angry at the situation. At the time she didn't know I was partaking in smoking, eating pot the previous few days, so she was confused and upset. I felt trapped by my anxiety and was beginning to get very nervous. I was tempted to run out of the car but she kept me in. She decided to stop off at her work and she ordered me to stay in the car. At this point I started to lose touch with reality and can't explain why I thought this was a good idea. I ran into her office flipping everyone off and ran to the bathroom. Everyone was in shock and the cops were called. They asked me why I was acting the way I did and I told them I smoked and ate weed and that I felt it should be legal. That was a great idea. After confirming with them that I wasn't going to hurt myself or anyone else, they decided that I needed to go to the hospital. At this point I had no reason to hide what I did and let them search my bag, which had nothing in it. As I was having a full-blown panic attack, they put me in the custody of my wife and I was in the back of an ambulance. I was in a dream state for the next 2 days and completely blacked out. I remember feeling as if I was dying and had let go of my soul and was in purgatory. I had a sense of astral projection a number of times and could see myself in the hospital bed and wondered why I couldn't get up. I later found that they pumped me full of benzos and sleeping aids. I awoke the third day realizing I wasn't at the hospital anymore. Feeling back to baseline, I felt that I'd explore my new surroundings. I made my way to the main area of the building and asked the lady at the desk where I was. She informed me that I was at the state mental hospital. What in the hell? At this point I was shocked and couldn't believe what happened. I barely could recognize myself in the mirror. I looked ghostly and tired. Apparently I didn't sleep for the first day at the hospital and wasn't making much sense when talking. In my altered state I also refused counseling, which made them initially think I was crazy. I was put on psychoanalysis and they couldn't find anything wrong with me after all of the testing. The only thing that came out of it was that I was in psychosis and had anxiety, panic disorder. I got out of the hospital after 72-hour hold and never had any legal issues due to this incident. I don't blame the weed but more my own stupidity for getting me into this situation. It was very hard to put this in words, but this experience has definitely changed me for the better. Since then I've smoked a couple more times, but will never eat weed again. I didn't even get a tinge of anxiety when I smoked again, but only took one hit each time. In a way I feel this has been a learning, spiritual experience. I found that before smoking I've always had a bit of underlying anxiety. I don't touch weed anymore just to be safe. I do still believe it should be legalized though. When used in a controlled environment it can be very beneficial. I feel that prohibition and fear of being caught put me into the situation more than the weed itself. This is a serious story from a serious smoker. I am no stranger to weed and all, but my last 2 experiences were awesome, spiritually and physically. My last 2 were just life-changing. I've lived a stressful life. I'm always picking my nails, shaking my leg. Whatever. I would have the normal twitch or 2 when I smoked. But for the most part, I love to smoke. I learned so much about marijuana in my experiences. It was pretty much my life, but something happened that changed that. I was addicted. I have read you cannot be addicted to pot, but I was. I was angry if I didn't smoke. It got to where I dropped out of college. I smoked heavily in college, and did nothing but smoke and listen to music. My favorite way of smoking was via gravity bong. The first time I hit the grav I was with my girlfriend and we had one of the best experiences of our lives. We were sky high for a good 6 hours. Laughing hysterically and just feeling good. Everything was just uneventful. Pot was so easy. I smoke, I feel better. Well, I remember coming back from a week-long visit at my father's house. I bought and 1/8 of some good stuff and met my girlfriend at my mom's house. We smoked via the grav and had a good night. The next night she decided to sleep at her dad's house. I didn't mind smoking by myself. So I did. I think I took 2 or 3 hits from the grav. Everything was normal. The usual. I ran a bath and got in. About 3 minutes after I got in, everything changed. First was the heartbeat. It was beating harder than it normally does when I smoke. It was almost like I focused in on my heart and concentrated on it. It got worse and my ears started to burn. They had recently started burning a few days before and still do to this day. I have no idea why, and then voices started. I had only heard voices once on marijuana and it was an interesting experience. These voices were different. I don't know if it was me or something else telling me you are about to lose your mind, you are about to die, this is it. I could feel what felt like a burning sensation flowing through my brain. Like acid was being flowed through my brain. I went into a panic. I got out of the bath and unplugged the heater because I knew I might not be back to unplug it and didn't want to start a fire. My legs were very wobbly walking into my bedroom. I got on the bed and started cringing. My heart was still going crazy. I was white as a ghost and felt cold. My arms were tingling. I tried to shake it off by playing a PlayStation game. It didn't shake it one bit. I couldn't shake it. I laid on my bed and began to shake. My legs were shaking. My arms were shaking. Not trembling. Shaking. Bad. It got to the point where I called my girlfriend. I told her to get to my house as soon as she could, that I felt like I was going to die. I didn't want to call 911 for obvious reasons. I also thought I might shake it. She got to my house and I told her over and over again that I will never smoke again. Ever ever ever. And she tried to calm me down. It was not working. I told her to call 911 and to get my mom because I honestly thought I was about to die. I was laying on my bed in my underwear and so honestly believed I was about to die that I asked my girlfriend to get my mom so I could say bye to her. Paramedics came. With a cop. I told them that I bummed a cigarette from a stranger and that I had just smoked it and felt this way. They thought it might have been pot. Of course it was. But I at least wanted them to know what I had smoked. So they didn't misdiagnose me or whatever. I remember having the most extreme cotton mouth I have ever had. My mouth was so dry that my tongue stuck everywhere it touched. I could barely swallow and breath. I told the paramedics that I had extreme dry mouth and they told me that was from the marijuana. Little did they know I had smoked many times before. This was no normal cotton mouth. Anyway. Another thing I was dealing with were attacks that came and went. Attacks that raised my heart rate even higher, caused me to shake and would send me into a panic. They came and went. They were serious. At the hospital they gave me an anti-anxiety and after 30 minutes I seemed to calm down and go to sleep. The doctors told me it was opiates in my blood. The opiates were from the cough syrup I drank earlier that day. I thought, okay, I'm gonna stay away from opiates. I also was terrified of marijuana. 3 months went by and I had a chance to smoke some free pot and I figured, okay, no opiates. No problems. I smoked and felt fine. I began smoking regularly again, but with weak pot. Swag even. And not with a grav, but with a bowl. A bowl used to never get me high. But it seemed to do the job. I smoked this way for about a month. I remember one morning. I seemed to jolt out of sleep. I woke up abruptly. I thought it was weird. But nothing serious. About 10 a.m. I packed a bowl and smoked. About 5 minutes later I knew I was about to experience the same thing that got me last time. All the symptoms returned except for the voices. I was in a complete panic and in fear for my life. My main and very serious focus was to not lose control and try to remain calm. I walked all over my house hearing commercials about death, and anti-drug commercials. It was extremely spiritual. I was hearing things that seemed to be focused at me on the television. Every room on different TVs had a message for me. Death, loss, drug abuse, losing family. It was life-changing. This time it was all pot. And wheat pot. Via bowl. This. 2 years ago wouldn't even buzz me. But now, I feel like I'm going to die. My last resort before I called 911 was to strip naked and run full cold in my shower. I jumped in with zero hesitation and seemed to be shocked into chilling out. I kept telling myself to chill out. It was like I lost control of my head. It did what it wanted to. The shower helped though. The cold water honestly kept me from calling 911. I took anti-anxiety pills, a muscle relaxer and a sleeping pill to put me to sleep and get out of this panic. During this whole event, I had an overwhelming urge to burn my stash and destroy my bowl. It burned every bit of my pot and later destroyed my bowl. I know it sounds crazy, but it was almost like I had to. Something somewhere was telling me to stop smoking. That I must stop. As symptoms wore off, I fell asleep and have never smoked pot since. Here's some history before the story begins. My boyfriend introduced me to the lovely world of marijuana about 2 years ago, and we have been smoking a J pretty much every night before bed for the last 2 years. We always do a lot of background searches on the sources we get the weed from so as to know it is safe, good old hippie weed. There have been a few times where we have gotten a batch that was very potent, but both have handled the trips very well with no real bad train wrecks. Last week, we rolled one up from a bag that we have been smoking from for about 2 weeks. We both had eaten a good full meal about 8 p.m. with no alcohol. My boyfriend takes Effexor for depression, and has to take it with food or he gets very nauseated. So as usual, he took his Effexor just after we finished dessert, and we retired to the living room to watch a bit of TV before bed. About an hour and a half passed and we headed to the bedroom to get ready for bed. Eventually got in bed and I lit up our joint, which was rolled smaller than we usually roll them. I had 4 good and big power tokes and passed it to him, and he had 2 or 3 tokes and passed it back to me. Another 3 for me and back to him. He had 1 more and said he had enough. I hit it a few more times and then laid back to relax. About 10 minutes had passed and I was getting a good ride already, but nothing more than normal. I looked over at him, and he was very pale, and fixated on something across the room. I asked him if he was okay, but he didn't respond, but he was blinking, so I knew he was still there. I sat back again and the room was quiet. I could hear a heartbeat which I thought was my own, which got my attention because I had never heard that before after blazing. I checked my pulse to find that what I was hearing was not in sync with my pulse. I looked over at him and by this time he was pouring with sweat, still sitting in the same position, looking at the same thing. I grabbed his arm to feel his radial pulse and it turns out that what I was hearing was his heart. I could literally hear his heart pounding as he was sitting next to me. Now I'm a nurse, so naturally I'm in touch with medical issues. I noticed his pulse was very strong and very fast. I counted 150 beats per minute at that point. I asked him to calm down because he was starting to get very labored breathing and he replied that he was way too stoned and asked me if I was the same. I told him I was high, but no more than usual. Suddenly, his legs started to spasm and twitch. This got me concerned. I suggested that he lay back a little bit and try to relax his body and he did. All was okay for about 3 minutes. I took his pulse again and it was up to 165 at this point. Almost at the same time, his head snapped back and his body went stiff and he began to convulse. I tried to get a verbal response from him, but he was not giving any response to anything. At this point he was unconscious and went into a full status seizure. His eyes were closed, dilated and unresponsive to light. His breathing was shallow, rapid and labored although his lungs were clear. He came to and immediately said he couldn't breathe and that he had severe chest pain. At this point, I decided he needed to be seen by a physician, and was about to load him into a cab and go to the hospital with him. Just as I was calling a taxi, he went into seizure again and I was forced to call 911. Ambulance paramedics arrived along with the fire department first responders and they put him on oxygen, 10 liters by full non-rebreather mask and started a heart monitor. He was up to 185 heart rate and showing a severe arrhythmia. His blood pressure had dropped to 75/50, which is in itself a cardiac emergency. He was taken by Advanced Life Support Ambulance to the hospital and given 2 milligrams Narcan and diazepam-4 and continued on oxygen therapy. Eventually, tests came back and showed nothing more than a small amount of THC in his bloodstream, and nominal amounts in the urine, which was to be expected. There was no other substances showing in the drug screening other than cannabinoids and venlafaxine. After more testing, the physician finally concluded that the neurological combination of cannabis and venlafaxine caused serotonin to rise to extremely dangerous levels in the cerebral section of the brain. This directly caused the incredibly increased heart rate, as well as seizures. His oxygen saturation was at 84% due to the fluttering of the heart. His heart was pumping so fast that its effectiveness was lost and more CO2 was in his blood gases than O2, thus causing additional cardiac stress and output. He had an arrhythmia known as a severely prolonged QT interval, which was triggered by the serotonin toxicity, again a result from the combination of cannabis and venlafaxine. At about 10 am the following morning, he had regained full consciousness and no signs of seizures since 3 am. The tachycardia and arrhythmias were absent. His heart was pacing normally at 78-86 ppm, which is considered normal. His blood pulse ox returned to 99% and a good normal blood pressure of 145/80. All of the physicians involved agreed to the consensus that this event was caused directly by the combination of the two agents, cannabis and venlafaxine. He was strongly advised to abstain from one or the other, and told that he was lucky to be alive and that he was fortunate to receive the medical attention that he did when he did, or things may not have had a good ending. We have decided to abstain from using cannabis from now on, as the effectiveness of the effects far outweighs the benefits of blazing every night. Certainly we will never combine the two again. I like smoking pot but have grown wary of eating it. Here's why. When eaten, it comes on slower and lasts longer. You don't know what you've got till it's too late. Usually, it makes for a nice day. Yet sometimes it feels heavier, not enlightening. Worse, it can be dangerous, as I had to endure twice. My new lady friend and I should have stopped at the simple joint we stealthily shared in a quiet spot near the throng entering the colorful yearly festival. Smoking pot is still illegal in our state, hard to hide, and we didn't want to risk offending the festival. So along with lunch at about noon, we each ate a brownie from a batch I had made last year from a plant in my yard. All was well until about an hour later when it started to hit my new friend. She is small and sensitive, so I had given her less than half of what I took. I had tried various sizes from the batch since last fall, so I felt I knew the dose. Her eyes looked dilated and depressed, not focused. She said she didn't feel good and asked me to stay by her. She descending into the worst case of THC overdose I've ever seen. It was worse even than the notorious birthday party of years past when someone brought a new untested batch of pot brownies. Most people had one. I had 2. Turned out one was about 8 doses worth of THC. Everyone got sick. Some slurred their words and couldn't walk well. The 2 bathrooms were constantly busy with small groups helping each other expel explosively from both ends. People were screaming. It was the worst party ever, funny now for the survivors, only in retrospect. We all resolved to go easy with new batches of edible pot. Too bad I didn't heed that lesson. I wanted to augment the already wonderful experience at the fair. Not wise. Buddha says, desire is the mother of suffering. How true that was for us. I was okay, mildly high and dry mouth. But my dear friend went into painful hallucinations between blackouts. I tended her as best I could, trying to reassure her, "It will pass." She had trusted me, and though I couldn't figure out then why or how, I knew it was my fault. "What is this shit?" she screamed. "What did you give to me?" she demanded, angrily. "What did you give to me?" she demanded, angrily. "It is the same as I had, only less," I feebly replied. She would go into vacant sleep only to emerge, her face contorted, her eyes dilated but not seeing, hard fright in her expressions. She went in and out of consciousness, dipping too low, coming out only to, thankfully, in a difficult way, puke 4 times. I summoned the Fair's clinic staff. We took her to the doctor. It was horrible, very hard on her. I was overcome with concern and shame. I barely noticed the bare-breasted teenage girls doing yoga just past her as she went through her ordeal. After a few hours resting in the noisy clinic, she had purged and rested enough to regain her legs and walk out. All I saw were shoulder-to-shoulder crowds to maneuver through. We left the fair and went home. I barely saw or remember the colorful, fun fair. Later, I remembered last year making batches of oil for the brownies, but cooking one down too much. A sticky goo didn't disperse evenly like the rest of the oil. There was ample THC in the rest of the brownies, as I had experimented with a few times since, but perhaps a sticky superdose in hers. It was one of the worst, most frightening, and shameful experiences of my life. I was stupid and irresponsible to not toss that sticky clump out of the mix, or to at least only give her a little piece, if any at all. It would have been a beautiful day had we not eaten those damn brownies. She and I are okay now, but I have a confirmed wariness towards edible marijuana. It comes on too slow, so the dose is a mystery until it is too late. Smoking is faster, brighter, and very hard to overdo, as I have tried to do. But it's also harder to hide, so, once again, our laws are alienating us from our police, our festivals, and our would-be/should-be safer habits. I have only smoked marijuana a couple of times in my life. From my last experience, I never will do it again. I have never done any type of drug other than marijuana or alcohol, so that didn't influence my last experience with smoking. My previous experiences before my last time smoking pot were rather unpleasant. I would always be nervous, confused, and my mind felt like it was trying to escape something because I remember screaming inside my head. All in all, I believe I would get abnormally high for the small dose I had taken. The last time I smoked marijuana, it wasn't a simple high of a relaxing, euphoric, peaceful and jubilant feeling. I literally was in the depths of hell and trying to find a way out. This happened a year ago. I don't like thinking about it, and I haven't told many people, but it means a lot to me. This experience has shaped my life forever and will till the day I die. I took about 3 hits of the joint and just sat back to relax. A few minutes later, the high started to come and the music in the car became more intense and slow. I was calm at this point as we arrived at my house. The friends I was with decided they wanted to go kayaking, so I went to my house to go to the bathroom as they waited for me at the shore of the lake. In the bathroom, I became hypnotized by this picture and my mind was going faster than I ever thought was possible. Time stood still. I thought I had been in the bathroom for at least 45 minutes thinking and staring. I remembered that they were waiting for me, so I freaked out and left the bathroom. As I walking out of my house, I asked my mom how long I had been in the house. She said 5 minutes. As we started kayaking, everything was fine. I was talking to my friends while we were on the lake, but they began to paddle harder than me, so I fell behind. Then it hit out of nowhere. I looked up into the sun to feel the beauty of the lake. I realized I was out of my mind and body. I felt very alone and dark, even though it was a sunny day. I felt different types of energy going through me that wasn't normal when I was one with my body. There was no time or space where I was. I knew everything in the universe, I don't even know how, but I remember saying to myself, Kayla, it's so easy, just look around yourself, you know everything you've ever questioned and you have everything you've ever wanted. I remember yelling at myself I was the soul of Kayla. I wasn't the human being of Kayla. Then, I wanted to cry but I couldn't. I wanted to feel happy or feel the love of what was around me, but that was impossible. I realized I was in hell. It's not a place of fire, or dragons, or unimaginable creatures. But, it's a place that is eternal. I'd rather call it a dimension than a place. But, I will never forget what it meant to actually be alone for the first time in my life, because there was no love there, no happiness, no sadness or broken bar, nothing, and I was nothing. I remember feeling these other energies of souls around me, and they were waiting for something, an escape. I wanted to go back to my life. I never thought that I would actually understand why life is so special. I do now because I lost it once and I am never losing it again. As I felt these souls waiting for something, I looked up and saw the one thing that connected me to the human world, that my body was in the sun. The energy from that light fulfilled me with this compassion and longing that I have never felt. I realized that these souls, and I was too, was waiting for the light, God, to save us. I remember telling myself over and over to never do drugs again. I even wrote a note to myself when I went back to my house. I don't really know why I wrote that, but from that, I know where I was, and even though I don't have all the answers now, I did then. I wanted to be saved and back to my regular life of love and family again more than anything. The more I thought of where I was, the more my body acted as if it was going to die. My heart would race faster than I recall it ever doing, and it just felt as though my body was going to shut down and I was going to be trapped in hell forever. That is the worst feeling anyone could have. To save myself, I thought of ways to get out of where I was, and I concluded that I needed to kill this place, to go back to life. From the outside it would have looked like suicide. But it wouldn't have been. I was going to slit my wrists not to kill my body or my soul, but to escape hell in hopes of returning to life, which everyone knows that wouldn't have happened. But before I did that, I saw the hand and felt this urge of heavenly energy that I had been longing for. I compare to what I saw and felt to the painting of Adam and Eve by Michelangelo, God/Jesus reaching through the depths of hell to save me. When this happened, for some reason the energy pulled me to go and talk to my father, which I did. I told him everything that had happened, and now I was in such a heavenly place, because I was slowly coming out of hell as I talked to my father. I told him as we sat in the woods about how I knew everything about the universe, the physics, chemistry and the makeup of everything, but never talked about my experience of hell with him. I remember telling him none of it matters. I said, this life is for shits and giggles, it's God's way of showing us love through us, rather than just being love. Make the best of it. Eventually, I became back to normal, and that was it. I don't know what it was from just smoking a few hits of clean marijuana. Many could call it a very high time, a messed up mind on drugs, a vision or a lesson. Anyone's guess is as good as mine. Alls I know is that it was as real for me, as it is for me to type this experience. From that I hope someone can find a deeper understanding on how drugs influence the mind, body and the soul, and maybe there is a larger purpose that nobody really understands until they die. I just caught a glimpse of it.